The champagne glasses froze midair. The music from the string quartet faltered. And then, in a booming voice that shook the room, my father looked straight at me and sneered, "This is my wedding, and that woman back there, she's nothing but a bastard." The crowd gasped. My chest tightened, every eye burning into me, humiliation clawing at my skin. I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to flinch, to cry, to run, but I didn't move, because little did he know, I wasn't just his discarded daughter. I was a decorated Marine general, and in less than 5 minutes, the same daughter he paraded as his real child would expose him in front of everyone by calling me something that would turn his pride into pure shame. If you've ever been underestimated, humiliated, or treated as though you were nothing, this story is for you. Hit that like button, subscribe, and get ready for one of the most powerful turnarounds and satisfying moments of revenge you all will ever hear. This sets the stage with raw emotion, humiliation, and the unbearable weight of injustice, while planting seeds of the powerful twist to come. The words sliced through me sharper than any blade. "Nothing but a bastard." My father's voice, laced with venom, echoed in the grand hall like a curse that couldn't be unsaid. Guests froze mid-laugh, their champagne glasses hovering awkwardly, eyes darting between me and him. For a split second, the chandeliers seemed dimmer, as if even the light recoiled from his cruelty. My throat burned, but I refused to look away. I stood there, rigid, forcing myself not to blink, not to falter, not to give him the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. Inside, though, my stomach twisted. My jaw clenched so tight I thought my teeth might crack. Every memory of his neglect, every cold shoulder, every time he had dismissed me as unworthy, all of it rushed back like a tidal wave crashing over me. I wanted to vanish, but something darker stirred instead. Not shame, not weakness, anger. A cold, razor-sharp anger that steadied me where humiliation had tried to knock me down. Because here he was, in front of hundreds of guests, using his own wedding day as a stage to humiliate me. And why? To prove to the world that I wasn't truly his. That I was disposable, that his new wife's daughter, a girl barely out of her teens, was the real child, the one worthy of his name, his pride, his love. He turned, beaming at the girl in her glittering white gown, and declared, "This is my daughter, my true daughter." The crowd clapped uncertainly, some forcing smiles, others exchanging uneasy glances. And me? I stood frozen in my Marine Corps blue dress uniform, the medals on my chest heavy with more honor than that man had ever shown me. The irony was brutal. Here I was, a decorated officer, 2 silver stars gleaming under the lights, symbols of sacrifices, of battles fought, of lives saved, and yet to him, I was nothing. Less than nothing, a bastard, a stain. I could feel whispers ripple through the room. Some guests pitied me, some looked away, embarrassed to witness the cruelty. My father didn't care. His smirk told me he thought he'd won, that by stripping me bare in front of everyone, he'd cemented his dominance, his narrative, that I'd forever be the unwanted daughter. But what he did not know, what not a single person in that room realized, was that the very girl he paraded as his jewel would soon shatter his pride in the most unexpected way. Because the moment her eyes met mine, her smile faltered, her champagne glass trembled, and in a voice barely above a whisper, she muttered words that silenced the entire hall. Words that would flip the humiliation back onto him. Words that would change everything. Her lips parted, but the sound that slipped out wasn't a laugh, wasn't a cheer, wasn't the sweet acknowledgement my father clearly expected. No, it was something far colder, barely audible, yet sharp enough to slice through the chatter of the wedding hall. "Oh my God," she whispered, her hand trembling as she lowered her glass, the stem clinking softly against the table. Her eyes didn't leave mine. They widened, almost in disbelief, as if she'd just seen a ghost standing before her. Then came the words that froze the blood in my father's veins. "She is my general." At first, the room didn't understand. Guests tilted their heads, murmuring in confusion. A nervous laugh or two broke the silence, but it died quickly, strangled by the intensity of her tone. My father frowned, his smirk evaporating, his confident posture unraveling second by second. "What did you just say?" he asked, his voice suddenly stripped of the bravado it had carried moments before. But she didn't answer him. She didn't even look at him. Her gaze was locked on me, her face pale, her jaw trembling. Recognition poured from her expression, and I knew in that moment that this wasn't about family politics anymore. This was about something bigger, much bigger. Because she wasn't just his new daughter. She wasn't just some sheltered girl in a white dress paraded out for validation. No, she was a soldier, one of mine. Someone who had stood under my command, who had lived through nights of fire and fear, who had once looked to me for strength when the world seemed like it was burning down around us. And here she was, the person he had declared his true child, the one he had tried to use as a weapon against me, crumbling in front of everyone, overwhelmed by the simple truth of who I was. Gasps spread like wildfire across the room as whispers carried the revelation from one table to another. Her general? Did she say general? Is that true? Heads turned, eyes darted, and suddenly the focus wasn't on him anymore. It was on me, on the bastard he had tried to erase, on the daughter he had mocked. I felt the heat of every stare, but for once, it didn't burn. It steadied me. For years I had fought wars no one in that room could even imagine. Wars that left scars not just on my body, but on my soul. And now, without me uttering a single word, all of it, every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every star pinned on my chest, had spoken louder than his insults ever could. My father's face twisted, caught between anger and disbelief. He opened his mouth to speak, but the girl beat him to it, her voice breaking, trembling with emotion. "She saved my life," she said, louder this time, her words echoing off the gilded walls. And just like that, the room turned against him. The silence that followed her words was suffocating. "She saved my life." The phrase lingered in the air, heavy, impossible to ignore. Guests shifted in their seats, craning their necks, trying to piece together the puzzle unraveling before them. My father's smugness evaporated, leaving him pale, stiff, and trembling, like a man caught in a storm he never saw coming. The girl, his real daughter, was shaking now, her glass forgotten on the floor, shards of crystal glinting under the chandelier's golden glow. Her eyes filled with tears as she turned her back on him and faced the crowd, her voice stronger this time, though quivering with the memory of something darker. "You don't understand. We were surrounded." The night was on fire, bullets, explosions, screams everywhere. I thought I wouldn't live to see the sun. Her breath hitched, but she pushed on. And then she appeared, calm, fierce. She pulled me from the wreckage, ordered us to keep moving, and when I froze, she carried me. Through smoke, through chaos. She carried me out alive. A murmur surged through the hall like a wave crashing against stone. Veterans in the audience exchanged knowing looks. Parents clutched their children's hands tighter. Even those who had no experience with war could feel the weight in her words. They could see the battlefield through her trembling recount. I stood motionless, my spine straight, my hands steady at my sides. Inside, my heart pounded with memories I rarely let myself relive. The smell of burning metal, the screams of comrades, the deafening thunder of artillery. I had buried those moments deep, far from the polished marble floors of wedding halls. And yet, here they were, being dragged into the light, not by me, but by the very person my father had hoped would erase me. My father's lips moved soundlessly, struggling to regain control. He tried to laugh it off, to wave her words away. "She's exaggerating," he muttered, his voice too thin to convince anyone. "She's just nervous, overwhelmed." But his attempt at dismissal fell flat, like a weak punch against steel, because the girl wasn't finished. She turned back to him, her tears falling freely now, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "How could you?" she demanded, her tone slicing through the hushed hall. "How could you stand here, in front of everyone, and mock her? Mock her, the woman who carried me from death itself, the woman who has 2 silver stars on her shoulders when you—" Her voice cracked, but she didn't falter. "When you've never lifted a finger for anyone but yourself?" The words were knives, each one cutting deeper than the last. Gasps erupted, some guests shaking their heads in disgust, others staring at my father as if truly seeing him for the first time. His mask of authority, of superiority, was crumbling in real time, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. And I didn't have to lift a single word in my defense. My revenge, it seemed, was speaking for itself. My father's face twisted into something ugly, a mixture of fear and rage fighting for dominance. His knuckles whitened as he gripped the edge of the podium, desperate to hold onto the spotlight that was slipping through his fingers. The once proud man who had mocked me minutes earlier was unraveling before everyone's eyes, his voice cracking as he attempted to reclaim control. "Enough!" he barked, his words ricocheting off the walls of the lavish reception hall. She's confused. She doesn't know what she's saying. The pressure of the moment, it's overwhelming her. But his protest sounded hollow, almost pathetic, against the sharp clarity of her truth. Guests who moments ago had politely applauded his speeches now leaned away, their expressions skeptical, their whispers damning. The sound of judgment was louder than any wedding music could ever be, a collective murmur of people watching a king lose his crown. The girl, his prized daughter, shook her head in disbelief, her voice trembling but resolute. "No, I know exactly what I'm saying." She gestured toward me, her hand trembling but steady in its conviction. "That woman over there, she didn't hesitate when my life was on the line. She didn't stop to think about herself, her safety, or even the fact that she didn't know me. She gave everything to get us out alive. She's a hero." And then she looked at him, her own father, with eyes filled not with love, but with disappointment so sharp it cut deeper than anger. "And you don't even deserve to say her name." It was a dagger to his chest. He flinched, his face reddening, the room's heat suffocating him more than the tuxedo ever could. He laughed nervously, too loud, too forced, the sound jarring in the tense silence. "Hero?" he scoffed, though his voice shook. "She abandoned me. She's nothing but—" He stopped himself, but too late. The venom in his tone revealed more about him than he realized. A murmur rippled through the audience again, sharper this time. People were no longer just whispering. They were glaring. Every guest, from distant relatives to his closest friends, now weighed his words against the truth they had just witnessed. His carefully crafted image of the respectable husband, the proud father, the man of honor, it was crumbling into ash, and no one was stepping in to save him. I remained silent, standing tall, letting the weight of my uniform and the girl's testimony speak louder than any retort could. Inside, I felt the storm I'd carried for years, the resentment, the humiliation, the sting of abandonment begin to calm, replaced by something steadier: vindication. My father tried one last time, raising his voice in a desperate attempt to claw back authority. "This is my wedding!" he shouted, spittle catching the light as it flew from his lips. "You will respect me in my house, in front of my family." But as his words echoed, the truth was undeniable. No one in that room saw him as the man in charge anymore. The balance had shifted, and for the first time in his life, he was the one standing exposed, weak, desperate, and utterly powerless. The silence that followed his outburst was suffocating. You could feel it pressing down on everyone in that reception hall, thick with the weight of unspoken judgment. Crystal glasses sat untouched on tables, forks hovered midair, and even the band in the corner froze. Instruments clutched awkwardly as if they too feared making a sound. My father had demanded respect, but the irony was bitter. The only one commanding respect in that room wasn't him. It was me. And then, like a final nail being driven into the coffin of his pride, his new daughter, his shining example of real family, stepped forward. Slowly, deliberately, she walked across the floor, her heels clicking like a drumbeat of inevitability. Every eye tracked her as she stopped directly in front of me. She didn't glance at him once. Instead, her gaze locked on mine, filled with something raw, admiration, awe, maybe even guilt. Then came the words that shattered whatever illusion of authority he still clung to. Her voice trembled, but rang out clear enough for everyone to hear. "General, permission to speak freely?" The room gasped as if oxygen itself had been ripped away. My father's face went white. Guests who moments ago thought of her as just a blushing bride's daughter now saw her bowing her head in respect, not to him, not to her mother, but to the woman he'd spent years mocking and discarding. I gave the slightest nod, my throat tight but steady. She straightened her back, lifted her chin, and turned to face the guests. This woman saved lives. She commands men and women who'd give everything for her. She's earned more honor in a single day than some men. And here, her eyes flicked for the briefest second toward my father. Earn in a lifetime. The blow landed harder than any fist could. My father stumbled back a step, his hand tightening around the podium like it was the only thing keeping him upright. His lips quivered as he tried to summon words, but for the first time in my life, he had none. His power, his voice, his carefully curated image, all of it had been stripped away by the one person he thought would secure his legacy. A slow clap began somewhere in the crowd. It echoed sharply, drawing more until the entire hall erupted in applause. Loud, booming, defiant applause. People rose from their seats, clapping not for him, not for his wedding, but for me. For the daughter he had rejected, for the bastard he had mocked, for the woman who no longer needed his acknowledgement to prove her worth. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I stood still, my expression composed, because this wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. The applause wasn't just for me. It was the sound of chains breaking, of an entire narrative collapsing in on itself. And in that moment, my father knew it too. His face collapsed into something pitiful, the mask of arrogance gone. He looked small, smaller than I'd ever seen him, while I, silent and unyielding, stood taller than I ever had. The applause didn't fade quickly. It thundered on, rolling through the hall like a storm no one wanted to end. People weren't just clapping. They were standing, chairs scraping against the floor as one by one, guests rose to their feet. It was a standing ovation, not for the bride and groom, not for the ceremony, but for me, the unwanted daughter, the bastard child he had dismissed in front of all. And in that roar of hands striking together, something inside me shifted. Years of rejection, the sting of his words, the ache of being invisible, they all started to loosen their grip on me. My father, though, looked like he was drowning. His hands fluttered helplessly at the podium, trying to restore order, trying to pull the spotlight back onto himself. "Sit down! All of you! Sit down!" he barked, his voice cracking, betraying the desperation beneath. But the more he shouted, the louder the applause grew. He no longer looked like the proud groom or the commanding patriarch. He looked like a fool screaming against the tide. His new wife tugged at his arm, whispering urgently, her face pale with embarrassment. But he shrugged her off, red with rage. He pointed a shaking finger at me. This is a trick. She's nothing but... He stopped himself, realizing that the word he was about to repeat, bastard, now sounded cheap and hollow compared to the thunderous validation echoing in the room. I didn't move. I didn't need to. I simply held his gaze, calm and unflinching, while everyone else looked at him with something close to disgust. You could see it in their faces. The illusion had shattered. They no longer saw a man in control. They saw a bitter, petty figure exposed for what he truly was. And then, like fate delivering the final blow, his new daughter stepped closer to me, no longer timid, no longer hesitant. She took her place at my side. Her hand hovered for a moment, then rested firmly on my arm, as if to say, "I stand with her." Gasps rippled through the guests. Even the bride herself stared in disbelief at her own child siding with me instead of them. For the first time in decades, I felt the scales tip. I wasn't the outcast anymore. I wasn't the child kept in shadows. Here, in this glittering hall filled with witnesses, the truth of who I was and who he was could no longer be denied. And then, in the smallest, most devastating of ways, his voice broke. "You're supposed to be mine," he whispered hoarsely to his daughter, the words cracking under the weight of betrayal. But she didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on me, on the person he had cast aside. Because in that moment, she knew who the true leader, the true parent figure really was. The applause finally began to taper off, but the silence that followed wasn't his to command anymore. It was mine. And he knew it. The silence after the applause was heavier than any shout, pressing down on everyone in that hall. My father stood trembling, his chest heaving as if he'd just been stripped bare in front of the world. For decades, he had built his reputation on pride, on control, on keeping others beneath his feet. But in this moment, with the eyes of his new wife, his new family, and every guest locked on him, that power was gone. All that was left was a desperate man, exposed and powerless. I didn't move toward him, didn't shout or demand an apology. I didn't need to. My very presence, decorated uniform, stars gleaming under the chandelier light, his new daughter clinging to my arm as if to anchor herself to strength, was louder than any words could ever be. He wanted me to be his shame. Instead, I became his downfall. His new wife tried to salvage the situation, pasting on a brittle smile. "This is just a misunderstanding," she stammered, her voice trembling. Let's continue with the celebration." But no one clapped, no one cheered. The energy of the room had shifted entirely, and everyone knew this wedding wasn't tea about love anymore. It was about a man who had tried to humiliate his own flesh and blood, only to be humiliated himself. My father tried to speak again, but his daughter, the girl who had once looked at him with trust, turned to him with tears in her eyes. "How could you say those things about her?" she asked softly, her voice carrying through the hall because of the piercing silence. She's my general. She's someone I would follow into battle. And you're just my father." Her words landed like a hammer, splintering what little pride he had left. The guests murmured, some shaking their heads, others exchanging looks of pity, not for me, but for him. The man who had thought himself untouchable now stood completely alone. And me? I felt a calm I hadn't known in years. Revenge, I realized, doesn't always need shouting or fists or fury. Sometimes the sweetest justice is simply living in a way that makes their cruelty meaningless. By rising higher, by becoming more than he ever thought I could be, I had dismantled him without lifting a finger. Finally, I turned to the guests, offering a small, measured smile. "Please," I said, my voice steady, "let's not allow bitterness to ruin this day. I came here to honor, not to fight." Those words were deliberate, not for him, but for me. I wanted to end this, not as the broken child he thought I was, but as the woman I had become, a leader, a warrior, and above all, someone who no longer needed his approval. The guests applauded again, not thunderous this time, but respectful, warm. And in that moment, I felt the final weight lift. My father's glare burned into me, but it no longer mattered. He had lost, not just his dignity, but the blind loyalty of those who once looked up to him. I walked out of that hall not as his bastard, but as the general. And the look on his face, etched in disbelief and fury, was the sweetest revenge I could have ever imagined. Life has a way of teaching us that true strength doesn't need to roar. Sometimes, the most powerful revenge is to stand tall in the face of those who tried to break you and show them that their words, their cruelty, their attempts to define you mean nothing. My father thought he could humiliate me, strip me down in front of a crowd, and reclaim control. But instead, he ended up exposing his own weakness. What I learned that day is something I carry with me still. Dignity is silent but unshakable. You don't need to scream to prove yourself. You don't need to beg for recognition. Just live your truth, rise above, and let your achievements speak louder than their hate ever could. Justice doesn't always come in the form of punishment. Sometimes it comes in the form of undeniable respect. And as I walked out of that hall, I realized I no longer carried the weight of his rejection. I didn't need him. I never did, because I had already won. If this story gave you chills, smash that like button. It helps the channel more than you know. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had someone try to tear you down only to watch them crumble when you stood strong? I'd love to hear your stories of sweet, poetic justice. And of course, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful, emotionally charged revenge stories just like this one. Because sometimes the best therapy is knowing we're not alone, and that karma always finds a way.